Wherever you're watching, welcome to Talking Business. Now, the United Nations has warned that the cost of essential foods are at their highest level in 3.5 years. And it's been caused by a number of different things. The ongoing war in Ukraine is always critical for wheat and grains. The shipping difficulties in the Strait of Hormuz and Red Sea, well, that's impacted the cost of energy and fertiliser, which are two of the most important costs for farmers. Across the Northern Hemisphere, droughts and fires have hit farmers' yields, and storms have already hit across Asia, and the United Nations is now warning that the El Niño weather pattern is set to intensify.
2 months ago, I warned that El Niño was arriving on our doorstep. Now it is inside the house and turning up the heat. Today's findings show that extreme heat is not a future threat. It is here. It is becoming more dangerous, and unless we act to protect people and tackle the root causes of the crisis, it will become deadlier still. The warm-up act is over. We cannot afford to wait for the main event.
So where does all that leave food prices? Well, in the 12 months to July, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the cost of key ingredients rose by 1%. The cost of cereals, it was up by nearly 7%, with wheat prices alone increasing nearly 10%. And meat prices were around 1% higher than the year before. But those rises were balanced in other areas, with dairy prices falling by nearly a quarter over the year, and sugar prices are down around 8%. But what happens next, given how volatile all of those environmental and political issues might be? My next guest tracks moves in commodity prices every day. She's a leading economist who's driven research for the Economist Intelligence Unit, as well as at brokerages. Kona Haque, welcome to Talking Business. It's good to have you here. And look, it seems that prices of all sorts of food is rising right now, but it's things like grains and cereals that are going up more quickly. Why? What's driving that?
Yeah, it's more about the fear of potential weather impacts, potential geopolitical infrastructural impacts. Today, as we stand, we're actually potentially going to have decent crops around the world, particularly in the USA and Brazil, but there are hot spots around the world, in particular Europe, which has obviously suffered a big heat wave issue, and also this lingering and growing threat of El Niño, which could ultimately lead to huge weather disruption patterns in East and Southern Asia, as well as parts of Australia and some parts of Africa. Importantly, if we do see crop failures, how are we going to protect ourselves by importing more, given the fact that today import channels, whether it's through the Black Sea, through Ukraine, or from Russia, or even from the Arab Gulf because of the Hormuz war, whether all of these impacts are going to result in higher input costs, higher transportation costs, and ultimately higher food prices.
Yes, and it really does feel like those two big factors are coming together at the same time. So some disruption to production, but also some disruption to supply. What do big shocks like that do to the global picture when it comes to food supply chains and indeed the availability of crucial food?
So it's the availability that's the crucial point at this point. So given that today globally stocks and buffer stocks are fairly decent, we're not looking at any kind of supply crunch as we speak. It's more about the potential. So what happened is when the Iran war started, the critical channels by which a third of the world's fertilizer gets shipped through, that started to really ratchet up the price of fertilizers. That means farmers around the world are going to be having to face higher fertilizer costs. On top of that, add the rising and record almost prices of diesel costs, again, because of this war in Iran. That's also putting the cost of transportation, mechanization, harvesting, all of those costs are also going up. Now add to that the fact that irrigation costs, drought costs mean that all of those are going up, and you're going to potentially see higher risks to yields. That's leading to some parts of the world really beginning to put their guards up and start wondering, okay, when do I need to import? How quickly can I import? And the issue here is that some of your biggest exporters traditionally, which would have been Ukraine and Russia, particularly for Europe, you're seeing a lot of the big export hubs like the Black Sea or alternative routes via the Danube River, those are all being choked off either because of war issues or because of low water levels.
So given that a lot of it will rest on price, those with the deepest pockets who can afford the more expensive food may get it. What does that change about politics? Are we likely to see, for example, that governments around the world start putting export restrictions on the products that they have to be able to feed their own populations rather than sell it to the highest bidder abroad?
Yes, literally, that's exactly what's going to happen. So we're seeing countries like India, for example, who've come off from 2 consecutive years of very good production and good yields. So they have ample supplies of rice and grains, in fact. But sugar, for example, this El Niño is going to lead to some drier than expected monsoons. That's impacting their sugar yields. And so there's already an export ban on the Indian sugar exports.
And Kona, even though the price of some things is going up, there are some foodstuffs where the price is falling. Things like milk, for example, and rice has been pretty stable. Just explain that disparity for us.
Yeah, it's definitely not all the same. Rice is pretty well supplied. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there were some record high prices in rice, and that led to a huge amount of additional planting and acreage, and farmers around the world were planting as much rice as possible. So India, Thailand, Vietnam have all had decent crops. So we have a decent amount of availability for today. When it comes to dairy, today also we have very good milk supplies and dairy product supplies. Again, that's on the back of previous years' high milk prices, which led to which encouraged more production and more herd building for the cows, etc. So we're seeing the result of all those high prices has led to decent supply situation. But when it comes to grains, the situation is a bit more nuanced. I think Brazil has really good crops. The USA also, despite recent dryness patterns in part of the Midwest of the USA, the crops still look pretty good. And importantly, you had a huge amount of inventories, which should provide any kind of reduction in the yields. But it's Europe remains a hotspot in terms of concerns, and also potentially South Asia if this El Nino starts to manifest itself through poorer yields.
And I know this will very much depend on where in the world you live, but what impact are we likely to see on prices for consumers? If we think about the Northern Hemisphere, maybe parts of Europe, the US, prices are going up, aren't they?
They are. And I think for Europe particularly, because the heat wave this year has been so dramatic, I do think that the crop yields will ultimately lead to a shortage of supplies, plus on top of the supply imports that are going to be at risk from the Black Sea, which would typically be the biggest export origin. I think those two factors, I mean, Europe will probably see in 2027 higher food prices, not dramatic like we saw after the Ukraine war in 2023, but we're certainly going to see at least a 3 to 5% potential increase in food pricing.
And Kona, what's your longer term assessment of food prices? They are going up. Will they stay up? What does the future look like when it comes to the availability and crucially the price of what we pay for food?
So I think it's important to know that today the price increase we're seeing is still manageable. It's only about 5% or 5 to 10%, depending on which commodity you're looking at. The risks are building, however, for a potential supply tightness for 2027, because I think that's when a lot of the producers start to feel the strain of the higher fertilizer costs, and the El Nino is expected to impact the fourth quarter of this year, which ultimately will impact the following year's crop. So I think 2027 is shaping out to be one where you have more supply risk, and therefore prices will probably ratchet a little bit higher. It's not going to be the food crisis that we've seen back in 2023 or in previous El Nino years, because our buffer stocks are so high. But I would say that, yes, we're probably going to look at another 3 to 10% higher in terms of prices this time next year, I'd say.
Kona Haque, it's good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you're